Andre Whitfield was 41 years old when he stopped believing the world made sense. 3 weeks earlier, his brakes had failed on a rain-slicked road. Now he lay inside a closed casket, unable to move, unable to speak, listening to the organ music of his own funeral. Doctors called it a rare complication. Everyone else called it death. His wife Bianca stood beside the casket for hours, accepting condolences, playing the grieving widow perfectly for a room full of people who loved her. She had no idea Andre could hear every word spoken above him. Then footsteps stopped beside the casket. A hand rested on the wood, and Bianca's voice, low and warm, thanked someone for making sure it looked like an accident. "No one will ever know," she whispered. Andre recognized the second voice instantly. His best friend? His business partner. Frozen, silent, trapped inside his own coffin, Andre understood the truth, and everything was about to change. Before we jump into the story, comment where in the world you are watching from and subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you need to hear. The warehouse smelled like motor oil and cold concrete, and Andre Whitfield loved it. He walked the floor slow, the way he always did on Thursday evenings. No clipboard, no phone in his hand, just his eyes open and his boots on the ground. The overhead lights buzzed above rows of steel shelving packed tight with sorted freight. Forklifts moved in clean lines. Drivers checked manifests at the loading dock. Everything in its place. Petty. Andre stopped beside a stocky man with gray sideburns who was taping a pallet. "That shipment going out to Memphis tonight?" "Yes, sir." Marcus Petty barely looked up. "Already on the dock?" Andre nodded once and kept moving. That was how he worked. Check in, say what needed saying, and move on. No speeches, no noise. His employees knew he noticed everything, and they respected him for it. Not because he demanded it, but because he'd earned it. 12 years ago, he had driven the first truck himself. A single refrigerated unit, a handshake deal with a regional grocer, and a phone that rang maybe twice a day. Now, Whitfield Freight and Logistics ran 31 trucks across 4 states, had a full-time staff of 62, and kept contracts with clients who had once turned him down flat. He had built every piece of it himself, read every contract twice, showed up before anyone else, and left after the last driver clocked out. He paused at the far end of the floor near the operations board, a wide corkboard pinned with route maps, truck IDs, and delivery windows. He studied it for a moment, then pulled out a small notepad and wrote, "Check Route 9 fuel costs, third quarter up 8%. He folded the notepad, tucked it back into his breast pocket, and turned toward the staircase. His office was on the second floor, glass-walled so he could see the warehouse below. It was spare. A desk, 2 chairs, a filing cabinet, a small framed photo on the shelf. That photo showed him and Bianca on the day he signed the lease for this building, 7 years ago now. She was laughing, head tipped back, her hand pressed flat against his chest. He looked at it every morning. He wasn't sure when he had stopped really seeing it. Bianca Whitfield was the company's CFO, and she was very good at it. That part had never been in question. Her spreadsheets were clean, her projections were careful, and the board respected her. 12 years of marriage, 12 years of building something together, or at least that was how it had felt for most of them. Lately, though, there was a distance he couldn't fully name. He heard her before he saw her, her voice carrying through the half-open door of the small conference room at the end of the hall, sharp and clipped in a way she only got when something irritated her. "No, I said Friday, not Thursday. Get it done." She hung up before he reached the doorway. When she looked up and saw him, her expression smoothed out, fast, like a curtain being pulled shut. "Everything okay?" he asked. "Fine," she said. "Vendor issue." She picked up her pen and looked back down at the papers in front of her. He stood in the doorway for a moment, waiting for something, a smile, a question about his day, anything. She didn't look up again. He walked back to his office. It was a small thing, but lately, small things were all there were. Last month, she had flown to Charlotte for what she called a CFO conference. He had meant to forward a document to her hotel and asked his assistant, Corinne, to pull the booking confirmation from the shared travel folder. Corinne had come back quiet, saying the folder only had the flight details, no hotel. He had let it go. Bianca had her own accounts. She booked things her own way sometimes. He had told himself that, and moved on. But he had thought about it more than once since then. He was locking his office at 7:30 when he heard Tobias laughing down the hall. Tobias Rain had been Andre's best friend since college. He was Andre's best man at the wedding, his first business partner, and the kind of man who could walk into any room and own it inside of 10 seconds. Tall, easy smile. Quick with a joke or a compliment. Everyone liked Tobias. Andre had always liked Tobias. He just hadn't expected to find him leaning in the doorway of Bianca's office this late on a Thursday, while Bianca laughed at something he'd said. A real laugh. Open. Nothing like the clipped voice on the phone an hour ago. Tobias spotted Andre first. There he is. You heading out? Yeah. Andre kept his voice even. Dinner with Bianca. Bianca was already gathering her things. I'll meet you downstairs, she said. The drive home started quiet. The rain came after the first mile. Heavy and sudden. The way spring rain did in this city, sheeting across the windshield faster than the wipers could clear it. Andre was thinking about Route 9 fuel costs when the brake pedal went soft under his foot. He pressed harder. Nothing. The car was moving too fast. The road curved left ahead, and the guardrail was right there, silver and wet and close, and he yanked the wheel and heard tires scream against wet asphalt. Then the impact. Then nothing. 3 weeks passed in darkness. That was the only way Andre could describe it later. 3 weeks of nothing. A black so deep and complete that it had no edges, no sound, no weight. He did not dream. He did not drift. He simply was not there. And then he was. The first thing was smell. Lilies, sweet and thick, almost too much, the way flowers get when there are too many of them packed into a single room. Then sound, organ music, slow and low, moving through the air like something heavy being dragged. Underneath it, voices, hushed, careful, the kind of voices people use when they are trying to be quiet but cannot quite manage it. I'm sorry for your loss. He was such a good man. If there's anything we can do. Andre tried to open his eyes. Nothing happened. He tried to move his hand, his arm, his foot. He pushed against his own body with everything he had, the way you push against a door you're sure should open, and got nothing back. Not even a tremor. His body was still and silent as stone, while his mind screamed inside it. The darkness behind his eyes was not the darkness of sleep. It was the darkness of a room with no windows. He was in a box. The realization didn't come all at once. It came in pieces, the way bad news always does. The slight give of quilted satin under the back of his head, the shallow space above his face, the way sound reached him as muffled and close, like being underwater. A casket. He was lying in a casket. Somewhere above him and around him, people were saying goodbye to him. He could not cry. He could not scream. He could not move a single finger. So he listened. Footsteps on a hard floor. The soft drag of people shuffling past in a slow line. A child asking something in a whisper, quickly shushed. The creak of a folding chair. Someone blowing their nose. The organ music turned over into something slower. A hymn he recognized from his grandmother's church. And for one strange moment, he felt the grief of it. Not for himself, but for whoever in that room was crying real tears. He thought about his brother Julian. Julian would be there. Julian would be standing near the door with his arms folded the way he always did when he was holding something in, jaw tight, eyes red. He thought about his employees, Marcus Petty, with his gray sideburns, standing in the back row in a suit that didn't quite fit. Corinne, his assistant, holding everything together the way she always did. He thought about the brake pedal going soft under his foot. He thought about that a great deal. The crowd thinned as time moved. The shuffle of feet grew quieter. The voices spread out, drifted toward the exits. The organ music softened to almost nothing. Then 2 sets of footsteps came close. They stopped beside him, right beside him, close enough that he could feel the faint shift in air pressure, the warmth of 2 people standing near. A hand rested on the rim of the casket. Light, familiar. Then Bianca's voice, low, barely above a whisper, meant for exactly one person and no one else. He looks peaceful. A quiet pause. Then Tobias, his voice just as low, almost gentle. It's a good service. It is. Another pause. He could hear her exhale. Slow, controlled. The exhale of a woman setting something down. I keep thinking someone's going to stop me. Ask me something I can't answer. No one's going to ask you anything. Tobias's voice was steady, sure of itself. The voice of a man who had already decided the outcome. The report is clean. The road was wet. These things happen. The hand on the casket rim moved. A small adjustment, like someone settling in. You made sure of that, Bianca said. It wasn't a question. I made sure of that, Tobias said. A beat of silence. Thank you, Bianca said quietly, for making sure it looked like an accident. Another pause. Then, so soft he almost lost it under the last low note of the organ, no one will ever know. The organ played on. Footsteps moved away. Voices resumed somewhere near the entrance. Condolences, gratitude, thank you for coming. Andre lay in the dark and did not move. He could not move. But inside that stillness, behind the silence his body would not break, something was happening that Bianca and Tobias could not see, and could not hear, and could not account for. Andre Whitfield was alive, and he had heard every word. The rage that moved through him had no sound and no outlet. It had nowhere to go. It simply filled him, slow and total and white-hot, pressing against the inside of his skin while the lilies kept their sweet, heavy smell, and the mourners kept their careful voices, and the organ played something that was supposed to be about peace. There was no peace in that box, only him, only the words still ringing in the dark. No one will ever know. The last mourner left just after 8. Andre heard the door, the solid, final click of it. Then quiet, not the quiet of a room full of careful people, but real quiet, empty quiet, the kind that has weight. The funeral director said something to a staff member in a low voice down the hall. A light switched off. Then another. Footsteps faded toward the back of the building, and then there was nothing but the hum of the ventilation system and the faint, dying smell of lilies. He was alone. The hours moved the way hours do when you cannot see a clock and cannot sleep, in long, formless stretches, broken by small sounds. A door somewhere, the distant rumble of a car outside, the ventilation cycling on and off. Andre spent those hours trying to move, not dramatically, not all at once. He started with his right index finger, the way his mind told him to, the way you would if you had simply been lying still too long. He pushed. He focused on that one small point, the pad of one finger against the quilted satin lining, and held the thought there until it was the only thought he had. The first time something happened, he almost missed it. A twitch. Barely anything. Less than a heartbeat. He held on to it. Worked at it. The way you work a knot that's been tied too tight. Not with force, but with patience. With persistence. His middle finger moved. Then his whole hand shifted, slow and clumsy, like something that had forgotten what it was for. He lay there breathing, just letting his lungs do the one thing his body had apparently been willing to do all along, and kept working. The fingers first, then the wrist. He tried to raise his arm and felt something loosen in his shoulder, a deep ache that radiated up through his neck, and his arm lifted 3 inches before dropping back. Progress. He did not think about Bianca. He did not think about Tobias. He could not afford to think about them yet. Anger was a fire, and fire burned fuel fast. He needed his fuel. He would think about them later, when he was standing on his own 2 feet. It took 2 more hours to sit up. When he finally did, when his back peeled away from the casket lining and his torso came upright, and he gripped the casket rim with both hands and stayed there, swaying, breathing hard. He felt like he had climbed a mountain. He was still sitting that way when the door opened. The staff member was young, 20, maybe 22. He had a mop in one hand and a pair of earbuds around his neck, and he stepped into the viewing room without looking up from his phone, and then he looked up. What came out of his mouth was not a word. He dropped the mop. Andre held up one hand, slow, careful, the same hand he'd spent 2 hours learning to move again, and said, in a voice that barely worked, rough and dry as cracked leather, "Don't." The kid stared. "I'm not dead," Andre said. "I know how that sounds. Please don't run. I need you to go get whoever is in charge of this building tonight." The kid ran anyway. Dr. Bakare arrived 40 minutes later, coat over her shoulders like she'd grabbed it on the way out the door. She was the attending physician who had signed the declaration. She came into the viewing room and stopped in the doorway and looked at Andre sitting on the edge of his own casket, still in his burial suit, hands folded in his lap, watching her. And she pressed 2 fingers to her mouth and held them there for a long moment. Then she crossed the room and did her job. She checked his pupils with a penlight, checked his pulse, asked him to follow her finger, squeeze her hands, tell her what year it was, asked him his full name and his brother's name and what he did for a living. Andre answered every question in the same dry, careful voice, and when she sat back and looked at him, her expression was not one of wonder or relief. It was one of deep, unsettled reckoning. "This isn't supposed to be possible," she said. "I know," Andre said. "You need a hospital." "I know that too." He held her gaze. "But I need something else first. Both of you." He looked at the funeral director, who was standing near the wall with his arms crossed over his chest, still pale. "I need you to listen to me." They listened. He told them simply and plainly. He had been conscious during the viewing. He had heard something that told him his crash was not an accident. He did not know yet who else might be watching or waiting, and if the wrong person learned he was alive before he was ready, his life was in danger again. Right now. Tonight. "I need a few days," Andre said. "Maybe less. I'm not asking you to lie forever. I'm asking you to be quiet, long enough for me to be safe." A long silence. Dr. Bakare looked at the funeral director. The funeral director looked at Andre. "All right," Dr. Bakare said quietly. Andre asked for a phone. It rang twice. "Hello?" Julian's voice, familiar, grounded, confused by the unknown number. Andre closed his eyes. "It's me," he said. "I'm alive. I need you to come now." He paused. "Tell no one." The line went completely silent. It stayed that way for a long moment, long enough that Andre could hear his brother breathing on the other end, could almost see him standing wherever he was, one hand over his mouth, trying to hold himself together. Then Julian said, "I'm on my way." Julian arrived at 4:47 in the morning. Andre knew it was him before the door opened. The knock, two quick, one slow, was the same knock Julian had used since they were kids, sharing a bedroom in their mother's house. Some things don't change, even when everything else does. Dr. Bakare let him in without a word and pointed him down the hall. Julian stepped into the viewing room and stopped. He was still in his scrubs. His jacket was unzipped, like he'd pulled it on while moving. His eyes went straight to Andre, sitting on the edge of the casket in his burial suit, and Julian's face did something complicated. Shock first, then something that broke open underneath it, raw and unmistakable. He crossed the room in 4 steps and wrapped both arms around his brother. Andre felt Julian shaking, or maybe that was himself. He wasn't sure. He gripped the back of Julian's jacket and held on, and neither of them said anything for a long moment. Julian pulled back first. He held Andre by both shoulders and looked at him. Really looked, the way a nurse looks, checking eyes and color, and the steadiness of a person's breath all at once. "You look terrible," Julian said. "I was in a casket," Andre said. Julian let out a short, fractured sound that wasn't quite a laugh. Then he pulled up a chair, sat down directly in front of Andre, and said, "Tell me everything." Andre told him. He kept it clean and in order. The viewing, the footsteps, Bianca's voice, low and close, meant for only one other set of ears. The exact words, he repeated them carefully, the way you repeat a thing you have memorized against your will, because your mind refused to let it go. "Thank you for making sure it looked like an accident. No one will ever know." Julian did not interrupt. He sat with his elbows on his knees and his hands pressed together in front of his mouth, and he listened to every word. His jaw tightened once, near the end. That was the only thing that moved on his face. When Andre finished, Julian was quiet for a moment. Then he stood up and walked to the window. It was still dark outside. The parking lot was empty. He stood there with his back to the room, and Andre could see the tension running across his shoulders, the rigid, controlled stillness of a man holding something in so it doesn't come out wrong. "Tobias," Julian said. Not a question. More like he was placing the name somewhere, pressing it down like a thumbtack. "Yes." "And Bianca." "Yes." Julian turned around. His voice was even, but his eyes were not. "They stood over your casket and said that." "They did." A muscle jumped in Julian's jaw. "Okay," he said. The word came out quiet and deliberate. "Okay." He came back to his chair, sat down, took a breath. "Then you're not going anywhere near them yet. You're not going home, you're not making a call they can trace, and you are absolutely not showing your face to anyone who might pick up a phone and tell Bianca Whitfield that her husband just climbed out of his coffin." "Agreed," Andre said. "Because if they tried once, they'll try again," Andre said. "I know." Julian nodded slowly. His expression had settled into something harder now, something focused. The grief was still there, behind it. Andre could see it. But Julian had filed it away for later. That was something they had both learned growing up. You put the feeling in a drawer. You deal with what's in front of you, and you go back to the drawer when you can afford to. "We need to know how deep this goes," Andre said. I heard the words, "But a prosecutor is going to need more than what I heard from inside a box." Julian looked at him steadily. "Then, let's get more." He came back 2 hours later with a printout folded into his jacket pocket. He'd driven to the hospital where Andre had been admitted after the crash. Not his own ER, but a hospital close enough that Julian had professional access through a shared record system he was credentialed to use. He'd pulled the toxicology report from Andre's admission file, the one generated in those first hours after the crash. He smoothed the printout open on the low table between them and pointed to a single flagged line near the bottom. "This compound here," Julian said. His voice was flat and careful. "It doesn't match anything on your prescription list. It's a sedative-class substance. Not rare, but it has no reason to be in your system based on your medical history. He paused. It would have come on gradually, blurred your reaction time, maybe made you slow to notice the brakes weren't responding the way they should. Andre stared at the page for a long moment. They drugged me first, he said. That's what this looks like, Julian said. And that means this isn't just a family matter, Andre. This is a police matter. You need to call— Not yet. Andre's voice was quiet, final. If we go to the police right now with what we have, Bianca and Tobias hire attorneys before the afternoon is over. They find the holes, and they walk. He looked up. I want it airtight. I want every door locked before we open the one that leads to them. Julian held his gaze, didn't argue. He knew his brother. Then we need someone who can build that case, Julian said. I know who, Andre said. I need you to call Desmond Okafor. Don't tell him everything on the phone. Just tell him to come. The safe house was a 2-bedroom property on the east side of the city, a plain brick building on a quiet street that Andre had purchased 6 years ago as a rental investment. Bianca had signed off on the paperwork without much interest. She had never visited it. As far as Andre knew, she had never thought about it again. That was the only reason it was safe. Julian had driven them both there before sunrise, taking back streets, parking 2 blocks away out of habit rather than instruction. Andre had sat in the passenger seat in a borrowed sweatshirt and a pair of Julian's old gym shoes, watching the city move past the window. His city. The one he'd built something in. It looked the same as it always had, and that fact struck him as almost strange, that everything outside could be so ordinary when everything inside had collapsed. They'd been waiting at the kitchen table for 20 minutes when Desmond Okafor knocked on the door. Desmond was a careful man by nature. Andre had known him for nearly 20 years, long enough to recognize that Desmond's first response to almost anything was a measured pause, a breath, a beat, a moment of quiet consideration before he spoke. It was what made him a good attorney. You never got a reaction from Desmond Okafor before he was ready to give you one. He stepped through the door, looked across the kitchen, and saw Andre standing there in borrowed clothes with a bruise still fading along his left temple. The measured pause lasted about 2 seconds. What in the— Desmond stopped. He set his leather bag down on the floor, slowly, like he was doing it to give his hands something to do. He looked at Julian, then back at Andre. Julian just said it was urgent. It is, Andre said. Desmond walked to him, gripped his hand, held it with both of his. His eyes moved across Andre's face the same way Julian's had, checking, assessing, confirming this was real. You were declared brain dead, Desmond said. I know. We sent flowers. I saw them, Andre said. They were on the left side of the room. Desmond exhaled through his nose. Then he pulled out a chair, sat down, and said, Start from the beginning. Andre told it the same way he had told Julian, clean and in order. The viewing, the footsteps, the whispered words. He watched Desmond's expression the whole time. That trained, composed face, the one that didn't give away much. But when Andre repeated the exact line, "Thank you for making sure it looked like an accident," something shifted in Desmond's eyes. Not shock. Something colder and more purposeful than shock. Julian set the folded toxicology printout on the table without a word. Desmond read it again, set it down. They drugged him before the crash, Julian said. Sedative class compound, nothing that matches his prescription history. It would have slowed his reaction time. So the brake failure wasn't enough on its own, Desmond said quietly. They needed him impaired. 2 layers, Andre said. Desmond sat back in his chair, his fingers pressed flat on the table, and he looked at the printout for a moment before he looked up. Andre, I need you to hear me when I say this isn't just a divorce case. I know that. Good. Desmond reached for his bag. Then tell me what financial and legal paperwork you can access remotely. Company records, personal accounts, insurance documents, the estate files, all of it. I have remote access to most of it, Andre said. Desmond, nobody's moved to lock me out yet, because nobody knows I'm alive. Something close to a grim smile crossed Desmond's face. Then let's use that. It took Desmond 45 minutes with a laptop, Andre's login credentials, and the quiet, focused energy of a man who had spent 2 decades reading documents that other people hoped no one would read carefully. He didn't narrate as he worked. He opened files, scrolled, cross-referenced. Occasionally he would stop and go back, clicking through something twice. Once, he wrote a short note on the legal pad beside him without looking up. Andre sat at the end of the table and said nothing. He had learned a long time ago that impatience costs you. He watched the numbers on the wall clock and kept his hands still. Julian made coffee that no one touched. Then Desmond sat back. He turned the laptop around so both of them could see the screen. He pointed to a document at the top of the file tree, a policy restructuring form dated 3 months before the crash. Your company's Key Man Life Insurance, Desmond said, and your personal life insurance. Both were increased and restructured by Bianca in the same filing window. He scrolled down, then stopped at a second document. And this is a buy-sell agreement amendment that adds Tobias Rain as a secondary business beneficiary. He looked at Andre directly. Did you sign off on this version? Andre looked at the signature line. His name. His signature. But he hadn't signed that form. Not in that configuration. He would have remembered. No, he said. Desmond nodded, as if the answer had only confirmed what he already knew. 3 months before someone tampered with your brakes and put a sedative in your system. He closed the laptop. This isn't a crime of opportunity, Andre. This establishes financial motive. It establishes premeditation. He let that land. Whoever planned this had been planning it for at least 3 months before the night of the crash. The kitchen was very quiet. Julian set down his coffee cup slowly. Andre looked at the closed laptop. He thought about Bianca scheduling dinners, answering emails, kissing him on the cheek before he left for the office. He thought about Tobias clapping him on the back and calling him brother. He thought about 3 months of ordinary days that had not been ordinary at all, that had been a countdown, quiet and invisible, while he went about his life without knowing. They sat across from me at the dinner table, Andre said. His voice was low, even. And they had already decided. No one answered. There was nothing to say. The text came to Julian's phone at 9:14 on a Tuesday morning. Julian was at the kitchen table of the safe house, eating toast he didn't taste, when his phone buzzed on the counter. He picked it up, read the message twice. This is Corinne Ashby, Andre's assistant. I got your number from the company emergency contact sheet. I'm sorry to reach out this way. I don't know who else to call. I've found some things in the vendor accounts that don't look right, and I need someone in the family to know before I take it anywhere, officially. Can we meet? He set the phone down, looked across the table at Andre. Corinne reached out, Julian said. Andre looked up. She found something in the company accounts, irregular vendor payments. Julian slid the phone across the table. She thinks she's talking to a grieving family member. Andre read the message. He read it a second time. Then he set the phone down carefully, the way a man does when he's thinking through something before he moves. She doesn't know I'm alive, Andre said. No. Andre was quiet for a moment. Outside, a car passed on the street. The refrigerator hummed. He thought about Corinne, 11 years at the company, longer than most of the drivers, longer than half the board. She had never once missed a deadline, never once brought him a problem without also bringing a potential solution. He had always trusted her instincts. The fact that her instincts had landed her here, reaching out carefully and quietly, rather than calling a reporter or marching into the police station, told him everything he needed to know. Set up the meeting, Andre said. Julian texted her back. Corinne arrived at the safe house that evening just after 7 o'clock, carrying a canvas bag over one shoulder and a careful, guarded expression on her face. She had dressed plainly, dark slacks, a gray jacket, like a woman trying not to be noticed. Julian answered the door and led her down the short hallway toward the kitchen. She stepped through the doorway and stopped. Andre was standing at the far end of the kitchen table. The canvas bag slipped off her shoulder and caught at her elbow. Her mouth opened, then closed. The color moved out of her face in a slow wave, and for a moment she looked as though the floor had shifted under her. "Hi, Corinne," Andre said. She put one hand on the back of the nearest chair, just to have something solid. She stopped. Started again. "You're alive." "I am. We had a funeral." Her voice was barely above a whisper. "I know." He pulled out the chair across from him. "Sit down. I'll explain." He told her the short version. The crash, the casket, the voice, the whispered words that changed the shape of everything. He watched her face as he talked, her expression moving from shock to comprehension to something quiet and hard. The look of a woman putting things in order inside herself. When he finished, she didn't say anything right away. She sat with it for a moment. Then she reached down and lifted the canvas bag from the floor and set it on the table. "I've been keeping my own file for 6 weeks," she said. She pulled out a manila folder, thick with printed pages, and laid it flat in front of him. Then she spread the documents out in a careful row across the table, the way someone does when they've been waiting a long time for the right moment to show what they've found. "Vendor payments," she said, pointing to the first column of figures. "Going back 22 months. Small amounts at first, just under the threshold that triggers automatic review. Then, larger ones." She tapped a name in the vendor column. "Apex Supply Solutions, Bridgeline Carrier Group, Tier 1 Transit Services." She looked at him steadily. "None of those companies have a physical address that checks out. No active DOT registration. No driver logs, no shipment records. The invoices describe services that were never performed." Julian leaned in over the table. Andre said nothing. He was reading. "They're all authorized under Tobias's signature," Corinne said. "Accounts payable processed them because the signature was valid, and the amounts were spread thin enough not to trip any alerts." She slid a second set of pages forward. "But these are the CFO approval stamps. Bianca's signature. 11 of the larger transfers, the ones over $20,000, carry her authorization." The kitchen was very still. "She either signed off on it knowingly," Andre said, his voice flat and even, "or she saw it and looked the other way," Corinne said. "Either way, her name is on it." Andre set the page down. He looked at the spread of documents on the table. Vendor names, routing numbers, dollar figures, signatures. 22 months of quiet theft, laid out in plain paper and ink. He had been walking around trusting both of them, had been showing up to the office, sitting across from Tobias in meetings, letting Bianca review the books, and the whole time they had been hollowing the company out from underneath him. The brake failure and the sedative hadn't just been about the insurance money. Tobias had needed him gone before he looked too closely at the ledger. 3 days passed inside the safe house like a slow-held breath. Desmond had taken over the kitchen table. It was covered now. Printed documents, handwritten notes, sticky tabs in 3 colors. Insurance binders sat stacked at one end. Next to them, a legal pad filled top to bottom with dates and dollar amounts in Desmond's small, careful handwriting. He worked the way he always had, quietly, methodically, one document at a time. Andre sat nearby and watched him work, and said very little. Julian came in from the back door just after noon on the 3rd day, shaking rain off his jacket. He poured himself a cup of coffee, stood at the counter, and looked at Andre. "Corinne called me this morning," he said. Andre looked up. "Bianca went to the funeral home yesterday." Julian set his cup down. Walked in, asked for Andre's personal effects, his watch, his wallet, the ring they'd taken off before the viewing. He paused. Then she asked the director why the cremation hadn't been finalized yet. The room was quiet. She didn't ask it like someone who was grieving, Julian said. She asked it like someone waiting on a contractor who missed a deadline. Andre didn't say anything. He looked down at the table. He thought about the funeral home, the organ music, the lilies, the smell of the room. He thought about her standing there without him knowing it, irritated about paperwork and timing. 12 years, and she had stood in that room and treated the end of him like a scheduling problem. He folded that feeling somewhere small and tight inside his chest. He would need it later. For now, he set it aside. "What else?" he said. "That's it," Julian said. She collected the effects and left. The director described her as, his word, composed. Desmond didn't look up from his document. "Composed," he repeated quietly. Nobody added anything to that. An hour later, Desmond stopped writing. He picked up a single page and held it at arm's length, the way he did when he wanted to look at something without touching it. "Andre," he said. His voice had a new tone in it. Not alarmed. Careful. Andre crossed the room and stood beside him. The document was a scanned insurance filing, older paper. The margins slightly yellowed in the scan. The header read, "Whitfield Personal Policy, Supplemental Claim Inquiry, Draft." The date in the upper right corner was from 2 years ago. "This was in the archive folder you gave me access to," Desmond said. "The one with the early marriage financial records." He set the page down flat and pointed to the second paragraph. "This is a draft filing. It was never submitted, but it was prepared." Andre read it. The filing referenced a boating trip. Lake Carver. A weekend in early September, 2 years prior. It described an incident in which the insured had nearly drowned following an unexplained engine failure that left the vessel disabled and taking on water. Andre remembered that trip. He had swum to a sandbar, had laughed about it afterward, called it bad luck. He had never once thought to call it anything else. "She drafted a claim," Andre said slowly. "She drafted it, and then she withdrew it," Desmond said. "There's a second page." He slid it forward. A single-line note at the bottom, in what looked like Bianca's handwriting. "Hold. Does not apply. She shelved it when you survived, but the paperwork was already prepared." Julian was standing in the doorway now. He had gone very still. "This isn't the first time," Andre said. "No," Desmond said. "It's not." He straightened up and looked at Andre directly. "What you have now is a pattern. 2 separate attempts, 2 separate insurance instruments prepared in advance. The embezzlement trail Corinne documented, the tox screen, the vehicle report." He laid one hand flat on the table over the full spread of documents. "This is not a case built on one piece of evidence. This is a case built on a history." Andre looked at the scanned filing. He thought about that afternoon on the lake, the engine cutting out, the boat listing sideways, how the water had been cold. He had helped Tobias haul the gear onto the dock afterward, had clapped him on the shoulder. He stood with that for a moment. Then he made his decision. "Desmond," he said, "I need you to compile everything. The vehicle report, the tox screen, both insurance filings, the draft, and the restructured policy, Corinne's vendor ledger. All of it, organized so a detective can read it straight through without missing a step." Desmond was already pulling a fresh folder from his bag. "Take it to Detective Ossie," Andre said. "Before I surface publicly, I want the investigation active before Bianca and Tobias have any reason to think something is wrong." "Understood," Desmond said. He worked in silence for the next 40 minutes, assembling the file with the same care he brought to every contract he had ever built. Precise, complete, airtight. When he finished, he clipped it shut, put it in his briefcase, and picked up his coat from the back of the chair. He looked at Andre once before he left. Andre gave him a single nod. Desmond walked out the door. The call came on a Tuesday morning. Andre was sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee he hadn't touched. Julian was across from him, reading something on his phone. The safe house had taken on a particular kind of stillness over the past week. Not peaceful, but contained. Like pressure building behind a sealed door. When Desmond's name appeared on the screen, Andre picked up on the first ring. Osei reviewed everything, Desmond said. No preamble. He spent 2 days with the file. The vehicle report, the tox screen, both insurance instruments, Corinne's ledger, all of it. A brief pause. He opened an active criminal investigation this morning. Attempted murder and conspiracy, with the fraud and embezzlement folded in under Tobias separately. Andre was quiet for a moment. And the officers? On standby, Desmond said. Osei agreed to hold until you give the word. He doesn't move until you surface. Good, Andre said. He set the phone down on the table. Julian was watching him. It's done? It's done, Andre said. Julian exhaled slowly through his nose. He picked up his own coffee. Neither of them said anything else for a long moment, and the silence between them was the kind that didn't need to be filled. The call from Corinne came 2 hours later. Tobias just sent a notice to the full shareholder group, she said. Her voice was low and even, the way it always was when she was working hard to stay calm. Emergency meeting, Thursday at 9. Whitfield Freight, main boardroom. She paused. The agenda reads Operational Transition and Interim Leadership Appointment. Andre's jaw tightened slightly. Bianca? Listed as attending CFO, Corinne said. He's bringing her in to present the financial picture. Another pause, smaller this time. Andre, he's moving fast. I know, Andre said. Let him. He thanked her and ended the call. He looked at Julian. Thursday. Julian set his cup down. Then we move Thursday. Thursday arrived gray and damp. A low ceiling of clouds sat over the city like something waiting to happen. Andre dressed carefully. A dark suit. A white shirt. No tie. Clean. Simple. He wanted to look like himself. Exactly like himself. Julian drove. They didn't talk much on the way. Desmond was already outside the building when they pulled up, standing near the entrance with his briefcase, and a composed expression that did not quite conceal the tightness around his eyes. He had notified Detective Osei the night before. The confirmation came back in under 10 minutes. The three of them walked in together. The boardroom on the 4th floor of Whitfield Freight was a room Andre had built. He had chosen the table himself. Long, dark wood, bought at auction from a firm that had gone under years ago. He had thought at the time there was something useful about that, about reclaiming something that had once belonged to failure. He stood outside the closed doors now and listened. He could hear Tobias's voice through the wood. Clear, unhurried, the kind of voice that had always known how to fill a room. Transition has to be decisive. The company needs leadership right now, not a committee. What I'm proposing is a clean handoff, temporary in title, permanent in function. Andre put his hand on the door. He pushed it open and walked in. The room turned. It happened in pieces, heads lifting from papers, chairs shifting, the gradual spread of recognition moving from the door toward the far end of the table like a ripple across still water. Then the sound started. Someone at the near end of the table made a sharp, involuntary noise. A board member 2 seats down knocked her water glass with her elbow and didn't seem to notice. Someone whispered God under their breath, and whoever it was sounded like they meant it. Andre walked to the center of the room at an even pace and stopped. At the head of the table, Tobias had gone perfectly still. He was holding a presentation clicker in his right hand, and he had not moved. The easy confidence that usually lived in his face, the slight upward pull of his mouth, the settled calm in his eyes, had gone somewhere. What was left was a kind of blankness, like a man trying to locate his footing in the dark. Bianca was seated to Tobias's left, a leather portfolio open in front of her. She had turned when the doors opened, the same as everyone else, and now she was looking at Andre, and the color had left her face in one clean sweep. Her lips were slightly parted. Her hand, resting on the open portfolio, had gone completely still. She looked like a woman watching something fall toward her that she could not stop. The room held its breath. Nobody spoke. Andre stood at the center of it all. The table he had chosen, the room he had built, the company that had his name on the door, and let the silence do its work. He looked at Tobias. Then he looked at Bianca. He didn't say a word. Not yet. Andre walked to the head of the table. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The only sound was the low hum of the building's ventilation system and the faint creak of someone shifting in their chair. He stood where Tobias had been standing 60 seconds ago. He didn't look at the board yet. He looked at Tobias first. Then Bianca. He took his time with both of them. Then he spoke. 3 weeks ago, he said, I was lying in a casket in the Harmon and Dale funeral home on Clement Street. His voice was even, unhurried. I couldn't move. I could hear everything. The room was perfectly still. 2 people stopped at my casket near the end of the viewing. He paused. One of them said, and I will give you the exact words, thank you for making sure it looked like an accident. He turned his eyes to Bianca. That was you. Bianca's jaw tightened. She said nothing. The other person was standing close enough that I could hear him breathe. Andre said. He turned to Tobias. That was you. Tobias opened his mouth. Don't, Andre said. Quiet. Flat. Like a door closing. Not yet. Tobias closed his mouth. Andre looked back at the board. 12 people around the table. People who had worked alongside him for years. People he had hired. People who had watched Tobias stand up 30 minutes ago and speak about decisive transition and clean handoffs. Every face at that table was turned toward him. Some were pale. Some were rigid with shock. All of them were listening. The words that were whispered at my casket were the beginning, Andre said. What my team found afterward is what you need to hear. He nodded at Desmond, who opened his briefcase and set a bound folder on the table. He did not distribute it. He left it there as a physical fact. The vehicle, Andre said. The forensic report on my car shows brake line failure that was not mechanical. It was deliberate. Someone cut the line in a way designed to fail at speed, not immediately, so the drive would begin normally, and the failure would look like wear. Not one person at the table moved. My toxicology screen from the night of the crash, he continued, taken at Mercy General by the trauma team. It shows a sedative compound in my blood that does not match a single medication I have ever been prescribed. Something was introduced before I got in that car. Bianca looked down at the portfolio in front of her. Her hand had not moved from the page. 3 months before the crash, Andre said, both the company's Key Man life insurance policy and my personal life insurance policy were restructured. The payout amounts were increased. A buy-sell agreement was altered to name Tobias Rain as a secondary business beneficiary. He let that land. I never approved that agreement in that form. The signature on file is not consistent with my known signing practices, something a forensic document examiner confirmed in writing for my attorney. Tobias said, Andre, I'm not finished, Andre said. He waited. Tobias said nothing more. Payroll and vendor records from inside this company show that over the past 22 months, funds were routed through shell vendors under Tobias's authorization. The transfers total just over $400,000. He paused. Bianca's CFO signature appears on multiple approval lines. Either she authorized the fraud, or she saw it and chose to look away. Either way, her name is on it. Bianca's eyes came up fast. That is not... And finally, Andre said, cutting through her cleanly, 2 years ago, I took a boating trip. The engine failed. I nearly drowned. At the time, it was written off as a mechanical issue. He looked at her. Desmond found an insurance filing drafted shortly after that trip. A filing that was quietly withdrawn once I survived. He held her gaze. This was not the first time. The room was silent enough to hear the clock on the wall. Detective Lawrence Osei of the Major Crimes Unit, Andre said, has had the complete evidence file for 6 days. The tampered vehicle report, the tox screen, the insurance restructuring, the embezzlement ledger, the boating incident filing. He paused. He has known I was alive since Tuesday. Everything I have just said to you, he already has in writing. Tobias pushed back from the table. This is... Bianca handled the insurance. All of it. I didn't touch those policies. He told me to do it. Bianca's voice came out sharp and thin. The buy-sell agreement, the vendors, all of it. He said it was restructuring. He told me it was standard. That is a lie. You came to me. The boardroom doors opened. Detective Osei walked in first. He was a compact man in a gray suit, and he moved without hurry. 2 uniformed officers followed him through the door, and 2 more entered from the secondary access at the far end of the room. Osei looked at Andre once, a brief nod. Then he looked at Tobias Rain. His voice was unhurried and clear. You are under arrest for attempted murder in the 1st degree, criminal conspiracy, fraud, and embezzlement. He looked left. Bianca Whitfield. You are under arrest for attempted murder in the 1st degree and criminal conspiracy. The officers moved. Tobias stood up fast, knocking his chair back. I want my lawyer. You'll have that opportunity, Osei said simply. Bianca did not stand. She sat completely still as the officer reached her, her portfolio still open in front of her. And for one moment, she looked at Andre across the length of the table with an expression that was impossible to name. Not remorse, not quite anger, something emptier than both. Then the cuffs clicked into place, and she was on her feet, and whatever expression had been on her face was gone. They were led out past the board, past 12 people who did not speak, did not look away, and through the boardroom doors. The doors swung shut behind them. 1 year later, Whitfield Freight and Logistics was still standing. More than standing. The loading bays were full. 3 new regional contracts had been signed in the spring. The fleet had grown by 11 trucks, and for the first time in the company's history, every department head reported to a leadership team that had been chosen for competence rather than proximity to Andre. Corinne Ashby's name was on the door at the end of the executive hall now. Chief Operating Officer. She had not asked for the title. Andre had called her into his office 6 months ago, slid the offer letter across the desk, and watched her read it twice before she looked up. You sure? She had said. I was sure before I wrote it, he told her. She had nodded once and signed it without another word. That was Corinne. She didn't need the theater. She just needed the trust to be real. Julian was not an employee, not officially, but his name appeared on the advisory committee charter, and he sat in on leadership meetings twice a month, sharp-eyed and unimpressed by anyone who used too many words to say too little. He had taken a reduced schedule at the hospital for the first 6 months after everything happened. He said it was for practical reasons. Andre knew better. Julian had needed to be close, and Andre had needed that too, more than he would have said out loud. The divorce had been finalized during Bianca's pretrial detention. Her attorney had filed the paperwork on her behalf, and Andre had signed his copies at Desmond's office on a Tuesday morning, with no ceremony and no grief he hadn't already processed. The restructured insurance policies had been formally voided by court order. The buy-sell agreement went with them. Every financial instrument Bianca and Tobias had arranged to hollow out what he built. Gone. All of it. The company's books were clean now. Audited, certified, and transparent in a way they had never been when Tobias had his hands in them. Andre had made that a condition of everything that came after. No shadows, no corners he couldn't see into. He had built this company once in the dark, trusting the people closest to him to handle what he couldn't watch. He would not do that again. The call from Desmond came on a Wednesday afternoon in October, when the light through the office windows had gone amber, and the floor below was settling into the quiet of end of day. Andre picked up on the second ring. Both verdicts came back, Desmond said. He didn't build to it. He knew Andre would not want that. Andre was quiet for a moment. Tell me. Tobias. Attempted murder in the first degree, criminal conspiracy, fraud, and embezzlement. Convicted on all counts. Desmond paused. 16 years, minimum before parole eligibility. Andre said nothing. Bianca. Attempted murder as a co-conspirator. Criminal conspiracy. Another pause. 9 years. The prosecution argued for more, but the judge weighed the degree of direct involvement against Tobias's. The boating incident filing helped establish the pattern, but the physical evidence tied more directly to him. Desmond let a beat pass. She's not walking out of this, Andre. Not for a long time. No, Andre said. She's not. He thanked Desmond, and they spoke for a few minutes more about a filing deadline. Something routine. The ordinary machinery of life continuing to turn. Then he set the phone down and sat still for a moment in his quiet office. He thought about what he felt. He checked himself honestly. The way he always did. The way he had learned to do in the long, careful weeks at the safe house, when rage would have been the easiest thing, and rage would have cost him everything. What he felt was not happiness. It wasn't relief, exactly. It was something more settled than either of those things. Something that had no clean name, but felt like a foundation. Solid underfoot. Permanent. He got up and walked down to the floor. The warehouse was nearly empty at this hour. A few drivers finishing paperwork near the dispatch window. One of the dock supervisors running a last check on the bay doors. The sound of a radio somewhere in the back, low and unhurried. Andre walked the length of the floor, the way he always had. Slowly, without purpose other than to be present in the place he had built. The concrete under his feet. The smell of diesel and cardboard and cold evening air coming in from the open bay at the far end. The low industrial lighting that turned everything to amber and shadow. He had walked this floor as a younger man, a more trusting man, a man who had looked at the people nearest him and believed, without checking, that closeness meant loyalty. He stopped near the far bay and looked out at the lot. His trucks, his name on the side of every one of them. He thought about the casket, the organ music, the lilies, the weight of the wood above him, and the sound of Bianca's voice, low and certain, and completely wrong about the one thing that mattered most. No one will ever know. He had been lying still in the dark, and the truth had been lying there with him, and neither of them had stayed buried. I hope you enjoyed that one. Be sure to like the video and subscribe so you don't miss the next story. I've picked out 2 more for you that I think you'll really like.